I'm gonna cut right to the chase. This is a sort of follow-up to our previous Scary Godmother video. Watching that first would definitely be advised, but here's a quick recap on the important bits. Scary Godmother is a children's book series created by Joe Thompson that released in 1997 and continued to release books into the early 2000s, but in 2003 they released a made-for-TV movie based on the first book. However, this movie would also take characters and plot elements introduced in later books and rework the story around them. 2 years after it released, we ended up getting a sequel to the movie titled Revenge of Jimmy, which, yes, is based on the second book in the series. The original story follows a little girl named Hannah, whose older cousin and his friends trap her inside an abandoned house. Her scary godmother appears and helps her face her fears. In the book, it's a pretty straightforward process. But in the movie, Hannah gets taken to a party filled with a wide variety of unique monsters, like Bugaboo, a monster that hides under children's beds, which will be important to remember in just a second. The monsters help Hannah get some payback by scaring Jimmy and his friends, and Scary Godmother gives Hannah a skeleton key so that she can visit them whenever she wants. There's not much of a story here, but for what it is, it's a pretty good Halloween special, even if some aspects of it haven't aged the best. So, if you couldn't tell already, Jimmy's Revenge is a direct sequel to the first movie, and right off the bat, the 2-year gap between films has done it a lot of favors. The animation in this sequel has been improved significantly. And although the backgrounds are no longer 2D pictures, the 3D models have improved so much that the environments actually look really good on their own, and the film still uses 2D art in some places, but the use of it is far more clever than the first film. You can tell the animators were very proud of their work here because you can actually see the characters' full bodies from scene to scene. In the first movie, a majority of it is done in close-ups, not showing off too much of the character models, but definitely saves the effort of animating more than they needed to. In this film, everything just looks significantly better, and thanks to them keeping the stylized look from the book's artwork, I actually think this movie holds up really well visually. It's not amazing by any means, but, it's an early 2000s made-for-TV Halloween special. The bar was never set high to begin with, but it generally, it looks really good. So as far as the story goes, things are a bit weird this time around. The werewolf from the first movie is narrating this movie, so that's cool, but for simplicity's sake, we won't be mentioning him anymore. But just keep in mind that he interrupts the plot around 4 to 5 times throughout the movie. After a quick recap of the last movie, we see that Jimmy, Hannah's cousin, has some severe PTSD. After learning that monsters are real, he has constant nightmares of them as Halloween slowly approaches. It gets so bad that he can't even eat without seeing the monsters. I know I made a joke in the last video about Hannah getting traumatized by getting left in the abandoned house, but that was unironically what has happened to this child. So after thinking it over, Jimmy realized that monsters can't come out on Halloween if there is no Halloween. So first, he goes and smashes all of the pumpkins in town. Then he goes and ruins all of the candy and costumes. And then he finally throws toilet paper all over the house that was going to host a big Halloween party. But each attempt was foiled by Hannah, who came up with the solution to fix every problem. What a nerd. Jimmy takes one last chance to get rid of Halloween by ruining the big party. But as it turns out, everyone thinks that Jimmy is wearing a very scary costume, and they dub him the winner of their costume contest. Though a very rushed ending, Jimmy learns to get over his PTSD, and he finally appreciates Halloween for what it was. And that was Scary Godmother, Revenge of Jimmy. Much like the first film, the plot is short, and I don't think I'd call it sweet. Despite being very straightforward, the way the story is told is a big mess. When you look back at the first movie, the story is told through 2 perspectives, Hannah at the party and the other kids sitting outside. Both plot pieces were very connected together, and everything was tied up nicely. But in this film, the story is told through 4 different perspectives. Hannah's, Jimmy's, the narrator, and Scary Godmother. But despite all 4 perspectives taking part in the same story, they all feel disjointed from one another. The narration bits serve no real purpose other than to pad out the runtime. Hence, why I refuse to acknowledge them. The main focus of the story is Jimmy ruining Halloween. As such, the story formula goes like this. Jimmy ruins an aspect of Halloween. This causes Fairy Godmother's world to go under some weird change. Hannah comes up with a solution to fix the problem. Rinse and repeat about 4 times. What makes this film feel so disjointed is that none of these story paths actually connect until the very end of the film. When Jimmy ruins a part of Halloween, nobody knows it's him. So when Scary Godmother's world gets ruined, nobody knows it's happening. And when Hannah comes up with the solution, she isn't aware of how it's affecting either Jimmy or Scary Godmother, because that's how disjointed everything is. It doesn't feel like there's any actual stake or urgency to the plot, especially when every problem in this movie gets resolved in about a minute. 60 seconds! But that sounds a bit contradictory, doesn't it? After all, I said the movie was filled with padding. How can that be if the plot's so simple and loose? Huh? Much like the narration bits, I also neglected to talk about the other 30 minutes of padding in this 45-minute special. Now, the first movie was padded out pretty well, but those were filled with fun character interactions, and they took elements from several books evolving the original story. This movie is the exact opposite. This movie does not take elements from the other books, but rather it focuses solely on what was used in the first movie. And since it doesn't introduce any new content, they ended up choosing the worst possible way to pad out the story. 1. Drawn out unfunny scenes. 2. More slapstick scenes like in the first movie. 3. A ton of fourth wall breaks. For some reason, this movie decided to get really meta. And that's basically all the narration scenes amount to, so unfortunately, a lot of really good character moments from the first movie are completely absent here. Which probably won't do me any favors when I say the book is significantly better than the movie, when the book is basically identical to the film. Jimmy is traumatized from the events of the first book. He decides to stop Halloween by any means necessary, but by the end he learns to appreciate Halloween and its monsters. Like the first book, it's short and sweet. What gives it a leg up over the movie is the lack of tedious padding. No narration scenes, no longer drawn-out jokes, just a straightforward, good story. Ultimately, there's not too much to say on the book itself, except that there are a lot of changes that the cartoon was definitely never going to get. Like how the movie focuses on the exact same characters from the first film, while in the book we get to see a ton of different kids. Of course, they don't serve much of a story purpose, but they help make the world feel alive. Whereas in the movie, it's hard to feel like Halloween's getting ruined if there's no other kids around it at all. Heck, the movie ends with a big Halloween party, except that only Hannah and the other 3 older kids end up going. But the movie flat out claims that if the party got ruined, Halloween would be removed off the calendar completely. The fate of Halloween itself rested on these 4 specific kids showing up to this house. Unlike the book that ends on a Halloween parade with all of the kids in town showing up, I suppose in the end, it all comes down to its execution. And the movie just failed at living up to its predecessor, as well as its own book. And it's not just something I feel in retrospect. I felt this way since it originally released. I was excited to return to this world and its characters, but we barely get any character interactions that amount to anything. Every problem in this movie is resolved almost instantly, so I just couldn't get invested in anything that was going on. It just felt disappointing to me, which sucks because the premise of the movie is legitimately really good. And as a sequel, the concept is brilliant. And I do think that the first 10 minutes of the film is actually all right. But despite the improved visuals, I don't think I could recommend this film over the first one. Also, a little fun fact to end this on. In the last video, I mentioned how later books confirmed the skeleton in the closet was actually gay. Well, another interesting fact is that Jimmy would end up getting a crush on Scary Godmother. He just went from being traumatized by the monsters to taking one on a date. Of course, it specifies that they're just friends, but it's just a funny development to think about. Anyways, I think that's all I have to say on this topic. If you'd like to see more videos like this, where I discuss the source material of some animated films, then be sure to let me know in the comments. And also subscribing would really help support the content we make. And thank you for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.